We located approximately 34 blocks of marijuana.
We pulling over these drug smugglers, and they having $150,000, $200,000, $500,000 in their car.
Everything that went in the bag got reported as seizure. What went into the back seat, they split.
The deputies take the money, and the dealers get the drugs.
We could sell all the dope we wanted to sell. Then they got greedy.
We stole over $150,000 in about 6 traffic stops.
It was all on videotape.
From them beating people and going kicking the doors.
I knew something bad was about to happen.
You can't keep something like that going indefinitely. This was bound to go down.
These people are smugglers, and they will kill you.
This was just a culture of corruption that was rotten through and through.
I kept lying and lying and lying. I got on my knees, I asked God to forgive me.
Sometimes real life is crazier than what you see on TV. This is one of those instances.
Over 12 police officers will soon be facing federal indictments.
This was the worst case of police corruption ever.
The cops were charged with stealing over $1 million in taxpayer funds.
I went from putting handcuffs on people to having handcuffs put on me.
On a clear, brisk day in February 1988, a small-town newspaper in Lumberton, North Carolina was under siege. Armed men forced their way in and took the staff by surprise. Within minutes, a peaceful day at the office suddenly turned into a terrifying ordeal.
I'll never forget it. I was working in news that day at the Robertsonian. And a woman came to the back, and she said there's 2 guys up front with shotguns.
I saw them as they came in the door. The man coming in the door, chained the door. And as he did that, the other guy pulled out a sawed-off shotgun.
And they said they had grenades that were triggered.
Self-described civil rights activists Eddie Hatcher and Timothy Jacobs came in and held as many as 20 newspaper reporters hostage for 10 grueling hours.
Eddie, if the governor talks with you, what are you going to ask him?
The governor of North Carolina immediately initiated an investigation into the corrupt Robeson County government, including the Sheriff's Department and the FBI agents in this area.
They were trying to communicate that Robeson County Sheriff's Office under Hubert Stone was corrupt, that they had the proof.
Hatcher and Jacobs, both descendants of Tuscarora Native Americans, claimed they had evidence that the Robeson County Sheriff's deputies were involved in widespread discrimination against minorities, including the area's Native American population. What's more, they accused sheriff's deputies of rampant theft of money and drugs from narcotic seizures. They even produced a map detailing the drug trafficking operation.
There were many people in the Indian community and the black community who did believe that Eddie Hatcher was right. There were allegations that there were too many minorities who were being arrested for drugs, being held in jail for long periods of time without the benefit of going to trial, and that individual civil rights were being violated on a daily basis.
Hatcher and Jacobs released their hostages unharmed and were arrested. The governor agreed to appoint a task force to look into their allegations.
The governor's task force, I believe they came down here with good intentions, and they looked, and they just did not find what was being alleged.
Hatcher and Jacobs didn't get the satisfaction of rooting out corruption in the Robeson County Sheriff's Department. After only a 4-month-long investigation, neither did the people of Robeson County.
There was supposedly an investigation. They found nothing. But it's not really because there was nothing to find. I think it was more the corruption was so entrenched in the system. I'd be surprised if they did much of an investigation at all.
It was announced that there was no corruption. And so was it a condition of behavior that was allowed to fester and grow? Eventually, when you ignore a problem, it comes back to haunt you.
Robeson County is the largest in terms of square miles in the state of North Carolina.
God-fearing people, simple people, churches on every street corner, very conservative when it comes to social issues, but it's arguably one of the poorest counties in the country. We just kind of always have struggled to get our footing.
There is quite a disparity. You have white residents, you have Native American residents, and you have African American residents.
There's no real industry. It's not close enough to the coast to get any of the coastal vacation money. It's not near enough to the cities to get any of that money. There's a lot of violence. The economy's pretty bad.
And so drugs have been part of the fabric of this community for a long, long time.
I knew from the time I was 5 years old I wanted to be a lawyer. Coming out of law school, I wanted to come home because I knew that it was a good place, but I also thought I could bring about change. And so I went to work in the DA's office in 1989. By the time I was elected district attorney in 1995, there were still allegations that the sheriff's department was corrupt. Just something struck you as being odd, that these allegations would continue to be an issue that was raised. I took my job very seriously. I have a very strong sense of what's right and what's wrong. I just wanted to make sure the right things were being done and that it was being done lawfully.
Johnson Britt wasn't the only son of Robeson County who wanted to make a difference in his home state.
I grew up from a large family in Fairmont, North Carolina, here in Robeson County. I was raised by my mother. My father, he walked away from our family when I was at the age of 7. When I was 16, I got me a little job working at a grocery store and driving school buses. It was a way to earn money and help my mom out at the same time because she was a single parent and she didn't have much education. When I was in high school, my best friend, he said, I'm going to school to be a law enforcement officer. And so I said, police officer, that's a good job. And you can make a lot of difference being a police officer. So both of us got an associate's degree in criminal justice. After I graduated from Robeson Community College, I got married and got a job for Robeson County Sheriff's Office. The new sheriff came in office in Robeson County in January of 1995.
Glenn Maynor became the sheriff with very little law enforcement background, and he relied upon and trusted the people that he put in positions of authority.
I was friends with Sheriff Maynor before he became sheriff, and he told me, I would like for you to be my transportation officer in the jail. It wasn't the job I wanted, but I took it. Eventually, I got promoted to a road deputy.
As a road deputy, James would patrol the streets for suspicious activity, apprehend criminals, and enforce the law.
And a lot of times, the narcotics division would come do search warrants in my area. And being that I wanted to progress my career, I would go with them every chance I got. Because people in the county knew when Robeson County Drug Enforcement showed up on the scene, they were in charge. And I talked to the lieutenant of the narcotics division, and I told him what my goals would be. And he said, you're going to go do search warrants with us? We'll help you. And so I looked at them, and they were all in a little, like, wolf pack together, and it was like, that's nice right there. While working in there is when I learned of the things that were going on and how they operated. Like, one day, the sheriff said, look, fellas, John Doe over here is running for county commissioner. He's got these tickets to sell for a dinner. Here's 5 apiece. You gonna get rid of these 5 tickets? Well, I'm gonna cut every bit of your overtime out. He said, now don't sell these tickets. He said, next week you'll be working 8 hours and going home and not making no money. He said, I'll cut it out. The day I got hired, I started out at $17,000 a year. So you needed that overtime. You get on board and you go along with everybody else. And you keep your overtime and you make your money.
The culture of quid pro quo was just the tip of the iceberg when it came to corruption in the sheriff's office. But for James Hunt, selling tickets to raise money for the sheriff's friends was a small price to pay to guarantee a job he loved. And his sacrifice paid off. Hunt was chosen to be part of Maynor's new elite squad.
In 1998, Sheriff Maynor announced that they were going to start doing an interdiction program, and it was just made for the county.
The interdiction program placed officers on the interstate to look for drugs and money passing through their jurisdiction.
drug interdiction programs really started with Ronald Reagan when he declared a war on drugs.
By next year, our spending for drug law enforcement will have more than tripled from its 1981 levels.
Drugs have always been a huge problem in Robeson County. Interstate 95, the most traveled interstate in the country, we're halfway between Miami and New York, so the drugs are going up and down.
Interdiction is one of the most important jobs in any police department, and that excited me because I wanted to be a part of something like that.
We located just approximately 34 blocks of marijuana.
The sheriff hired Robbie Bishop to come teach me how to do interstate criminal enforcement.
This just shows you how much you can hide in one little small pallet area.
Robbie Bishop was a well-known interdiction officer who was enlisted by law enforcement departments all over the country. Bishop assisted in the seizures of over 10,000 pounds of narcotics and over $8 million from drug traffickers. To James Hunt, he was the ultimate role model.
Robbie would tell me what to look for, what people are going to say to me, how I need to respond to them, how can I legally get inside their car without violating their rights. He always called me big guy. He said, big guy, he said, I'm promising you, the first car we stop and it's got money in it, it's going to be like nothing you've ever seen or experienced in your life.
Safety is a priority in searching any vehicle out here for narcotics. No load is worth your life.
Robbie Bishop had a golden rule. He said, I don't care what you do. Don't ever search a car by yourself. These people are smugglers. He said, they do not care and they will kill you.
That advice became critical in September of 1998, while Hunt was riding with Bishop and another deputy, Joey Smith. Hunt learned just how dangerous his job really was.
That day, we were on the interstate trying to see what we could find. We were getting close to like 8:30, 9 o'clock. I said, it's time to go home. So I took my bulletproof vest off, threw it in the back seat with Robbie. Joy was in the front seat with me, and our car come by me running about 100 miles an hour.
James Hunt started pursuing this car, a late modeled Chevrolet Camaro. They eventually got it stopped.
I took my car and pulled it up to his driver's door where he couldn't move the car. Joey Smith jumps out of my car, runs around and jumps in the car with the bad guy. They are tussling on the inside of the car. I run around and I open the door. I reach in, I pulled him away and went to put him on the ground. He took his right hand, reached in his waistband and pulled out a .357 Magnum, stuck it to my chest.
The I-95 corridor between New York and Miami runs right through Robeson County. And on September 23, 1998, an enthusiastic sheriff's deputy ended his 16-hour shift by pulling over one last speeding car that was certain to contain drugs.
We were on the interstate. I run around to the back of my car and come up to the driver's door of the bad guy. My goal is to pull him out and put him on the ground. Get on the ground, pull my gun out. Get on the ground, get on the ground. And he took his right hand, reached in his waistband and pulled out a .357 Magnum, stuck it to my chest. The bullet entered my chest here, and before I could get the bad guy to the ground, he pulled the trigger and shot me again. And the next thing I realized, the guys in the unit had arrived on the scene. I'm on all fours, and I'm trying not to breathe, because every time I take a deep breath, I'm burning. It is burning my insides. I said, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I blinked out and closed my eyes, and the next time I opened my eyes, little did I know, I had been out for over 24 hours, and I had been on life support for a little while.
He nearly dies. He goes through a long recovery process, one in which many people didn't think he would survive, but then much less come back to work.
I lost half of my colon, part of my intestines, my gallbladder. One bullet went through me, and one bullet still in me. So I'm carrying around a piece of that shooting for the rest of my life.
Despite suffering such traumatic injuries, James couldn't wait to get back to work. His passion for the job did not go unnoticed.
Sheriff Maynard called me into the office. He said there's an award that they hand out every year called the National Sheriff's Association Deputy of the Year Award. And he said, you have won that award. You done good, big guy. You didn't let getting shot knock you down. You got back up, and now you are going to get recognized as being one of the best out there. On August 31st, 1999, my doctor cleared me to return to work. The very next week is when they told me I would start back doing interdiction and that I would be doing it with Steve Lovin.
Steve Lovin, who was an officer that was initially assigned to work in the drug unit and ultimately was part of a team that worked the interstate. Steve was much more vocal than James. James really, to be as big as a man as he is very quiet, was very reserved.
I said, I work with anybody. I'm just glad to get my job back.
But James's eagerness to return to the force was tempered by a strange and unexpected warning from his boss.
The sheriff called me in the office. He said, James, listen, people in the county have been telling me that Steve Lovin was crooked. He said, you keep an eye on him. If he's doing something wrong, you let me know. And I'm like, oh my God, this is a big responsibility. There's something wrong with this picture right here. Looking back now, I shouldn't have been the one the sheriff's saying, hey, keep an eye on this boy. If he felt he was crooked, he should have figured that out before he put him out there to seize millions of dollars. The sheriff's office had a stigma about itself for many years. People suspected that the sheriff's office had corruption within the department. When I first started working there, I really didn't know that there was corruption within the drug enforcement, but I was about to find out.
So James Hunt, he and Steve are on the interstate together, and they're doing their thing, stopping cars, seizing dope, seizing money.
When you're spending 16 hours a day on the interstate or on any job with someone, you develop a bond with that person. He told me, he said, James, in order for us to be successful, we have to be at each other's back every step of the way. So we developed that bond. It got so strong, I felt comfortable telling him, Steve, the sheriff told me they suspect you was taking drugs and money. And his initial response was, the sheriff don't know what he's talking about.
From that moment on, an unshakable trust began to grow between Hunt and Lovin. The two quickly became inseparable.
I'm like, this dude is straight up real. I know I can trust Steve Lovin. I'ma like working with him. Steve and I would go to work every morning at 10 o'clock, and we'd sit there and watch cars all day long. Everybody's nervous when the police pull them over, but it's the level of nervousness that they're going to have. That's what I'm looking for. Things that they can't control, like their carotid artery is going to start jumping. They're going to start looking away. Their hands are going to be sweaty. They're going to fidget. They're going to wipe their hands on their pants.
James Hunt and Steve Lovin found a lot of success stopping cars with lots of drugs, lots of money, and I'm talking sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. This money would then find its way back to the sheriff's office.
Seizing money from drug stops was a routine and legal way for the sheriff's office to pay for the basics. It was a well-deserved incentive for deputies who were working long hours to keep drugs out of Robeson County.
They can buy lots and lots of equipment, radios, guns, vehicles, and they were paid for it through the asset forfeiture program. They got so tied up in the asset forfeiture part of it that it was all about being not so much law enforcement, but the money police. And so that's where money started driving the train.
But sometimes the pressure to fill the coffers was over the top.
When we would go days and weeks without seizing any money, the sheriff would be like, hey, can you go out there and find us some money? So sometimes I get up next to a car. I let them get nervous by me riding beside them and let them swerve over a little bit. And then I'd pull him over for swerving in the road. When in actuality, I actually made him swerve to find more money because we funded that sheriff's department off of that interstate. Over the first year and a half out on the interstate, Steve said, James, ain't it amazing that we pulling over these drug smugglers and they having $150,000, $200,000, $500,000 in their car. Lord God, your salary's only like $25,000 base salary. This is not the way it should be. So I'm like, yeah, you're right. Boy, that stinks. I wish we could be getting this money. And eventually Steve looked at me and he said, we can. I was looking at Steve like, what in the world?
Sweeping drug busts along the I-95 corridor were a vital supplement to the Robeson County Sheriff's Department's budget. But for interdiction officers James Hunt and Steve Lovin, counting up stacks of cash planted seeds of resentment.
So one day, Steve's like, it's a shame they don't pay us more money. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Look at all this money we bring into the sheriff's office. We need to be getting paid for what we're doing out here. And then Steve said, we can. I'm like, no, we can't. He's like, yes, we can. He said, but in order to, you have to trust me. He said, you trust me? I said, I trust you. He said, we can take it. Steve said, James, these are drug smugglers. Do you think they're going to call Sheriff Maynard up and say, hey, Sheriff, I was smuggling $500,000 from New York to Miami, but your drug agents took some of my money. I said, but what if we get caught? I said, man, I don't want to lose my job. I don't know if I could do that. He said, all you have to do is trust me. He said, would you protect me for anything? I said, I'll protect you, Steve. I said, our lives are in each other's hands out here every day. That's the kind of situation I was in. And it was bad.
Eventually, as the interdiction team continued, James Hunt and Steve Lovin were training officers in interdiction across the state of North Carolina. They developed their own tactics on how to conduct raids, but there was nobody internally checking what they were doing. Everybody was patting them on the back for a good day's work. And they brought a lot of good press to the sheriff. And so he didn't question what they were doing.
The latter part of 2000, almost a year I was back out there working with Steve, is when we started to talk about taking the money. He said, brother, if you ever tell on us and cause me to lose my son, I'll make sure you never see your son ever again. So the first time we done it, I pulled these guys over. Steve found the secret compartment. They had like $200,000 in the car. I tell them to get on the ground, and I handcuff them. So then the object is to take the money out the compartment and put it on the hood of our patrol car and count the bundles in front of the camera so they can see how much we got. But what Steve would do is he would leave 2 bundles in the console. Once we put the money on the hood, I'm looking in the camera of my car, counting these bundles of money, because I wanted the world to see what we got, while Steve is back up there at the car, putting them 2 bundles he left in there in his shirt. Then we get that money, and Steve and I would pull up at my house, and we go inside. We sit down, and we count them 2 bundles of money, and we split it 50-50. There's your half, there's my half. And then we go back to work like nothing's never happened and start back looking for more cars and more money. Steve got an adrenaline high from seizing drugs and money just like I did.
Lovin and Hunt started spending their take and living more like the drug dealers they were stealing from.
One time, Steve said, I want to stop at the Harley Davidson store. We went in there. Steve Lovin told that man, said, I want to order a motorcycle. Pearl white, I want this on it, that on it. Steve pulled out $9,000. He said, here's half of the money now. I'll come back in a few weeks and pick up my motorcycle.
In a poor county with few resources, a sheriff's deputy spending a whole year's salary on a motorcycle was sure to raise suspicion.
They just appeared to be living way beyond their means. New personal vehicles, new boats. And you say, how are you doing this? But here are these guys that are making literally nothing for a salary, but yet they have every bell and whistle that they want. But Sheriff Maynor, he didn't question what they were doing.
Hunt soon learned that his partner, Steve Lovin, wasn't just pocketing cash during seizures when they were on a job together. He was also robbing drug dealers on his off hours.
As I was working with Steve began to feel comfortable, and he could tell me things about how he was doing things in the county. He had been stealing money before I even met him. Steve Lovin told me he would take money from all these drug dealers.
My name's Eugene Scrapeland. I am a former drug dealer. I was a citizen of Robeson County. I first met Steve Lovin when I was probably 16, 17 at the time. I was paying Steve Lovin off, so that way we could sell all the dope we wanted to sell.
I'm kind of nervous. I got nervous. My name is James Dodds Jacobs. Back in the day, me and Eugene was paying the law enforcement to sell drugs, and we was more like a mafia type deal.
In any drug investigation, to be successful, officers have to develop informants.
In general, informants either work for money or they work because you have charges on them. Basically, you're either going to be arrested or you're going to start cooperating.
Like most Robeson County narcotics investigators, Steve Lovin had his own informants. But instead of using them to rid the community of drugs, he was bribing his informants for money and letting drugs run rampant.
Eugene had got busted with 2 ounces of dope, and I didn't want to see him go to prison. And Steve said, you pay us, and, if you do this for Eugene, that, he won't go to prison.
After that, I put 10,000 in one of them bags, and I went by his mama's there, throwed it out right side the mailbox. And I told him, I said, there's something there at your mama's house there beside the mailbox with a brown paper bag, so you might want to check it out. He stopped me the next week, and he told me, he said, that's all you had to do from the get-go.
What Steve Lovin, as a deputy, was able to offer Eugene was pretty simple. He could make an arrest go away. He didn't have to even file any paperwork. If you're in that situation, that is your ticket out.
But Lovin wasn't the only deputy using drug dealers to get rich.
Steve Lovin, CT, and Roger Taylor. We would go out doing drug busts, and they'd want us to go with them, to help them look for drugs.
According to the informant, when Lovin wasn't with his partner James Hunt ripping off seizures they made on I-95, he and other corrupt sheriff's deputies were using their drug dealer informants to raid the homes of other dealers.
We would go and do drug busts, and if they couldn't find the drugs, they would call us, and we would go find the drugs for them.
They would, take money, drugs, or give me money or drugs. Whatever it took back then, we'd do whatever they wanted done. We was both getting so much money. They was getting their part, and I was getting my part. And then they got greedy.
By 2003, at least 4 known Robeson County Sheriff's deputies were neck-deep in cash, ripping off drug dealers and stealing from the department's coffers. The money that should have gone to bolster the budget and help the community was instead lining the pockets of corrupt cops.
All total, I think me and Steve stole over $150,000. We stole over $150,000 in about 6 traffic stops.
But that was barely scratching the surface of the corruption in the sheriff's office. When Lovin wasn't working the I-95 with Hunt, he and a handful of other deputies were colluding with drug dealers and letting drugs flood the county.
It was all about money, and we was paying them. And they said, we'll stretch your back. We'll stretch your, and y'all can sell all the drugs you want.
God, it would be Big so much money I couldn't even keep up with it at times.
When we was rolling, you know what I'm saying, we make $100,000 profit.
When you go to putting your hands on that kind of money, it's hard to resist it.
Dealers like Jacobs and Strickland were happy to be raking in so much cash. But when the deputies' tactics became more extreme, they started to worry.
It got where the money to them got worse and worse to them, then they got to taking more and more chances. Going, kicking the doors, going to the wrong houses. They'd go to drug dealers' house, wouldn't even be the drug dealers, it'd be innocent people that didn't have nothing to do with it.
They're supposed to try to stop the transport of drugs from Florida up in the eastern seaboard. Instead, they're ripping off drug dealers, they're stealing money, they're stealing drugs, and the flow of drugs and money and guns, that hasn't stopped. So now the drug problem gets worse. And at some point, things started to escalate. You can't keep something like that going indefinitely. This was bound to go down.
This case started when an informant of the Robeson County Sheriff's Office walked into that little satellite SBI office in Lumberton and said, "I want to make a complaint." This informant felt like he'd been done wrong by the sheriff's office. Either they didn't pay him or they insulted him or did something to him that he didn't like. And said, "I'm a convicted felon. I was allowed to carry a firearm during a drug operation by Robeson County."
There were allegations that the sheriff's department was setting up a home invasion of an individual that they alleged was a drug dealer. It involved an informant who went out and actually recruited people to participate in the crime. The deputies provided those individuals through the informant with T-shirts that read police on the back, toy police badges, actually provided them guns.
So the informant tells us that basically criminals were going to pose as law enforcement officers to rip off some drug dealers for a large amount of money. And the informant was given a gun to help participate in this drug ripoff. I mean, it really was unbelievable.
These guys are convicted felons. They should be nowhere near 9mm, nothing. No weapons. And yet the deputies armed them and said, "We're going to send them in." So what happened is the deputies take the money and the dealers get the drugs. Everybody leaves happy. But that doesn't happen.
The sheriff's department made the informant mad. He had a number of driving charges that were pending, but he was promised that they would get them dismissed. That never occurred because they never followed through on it.
Johnson Britt heard about the convicted felon carrying the weapon. He stepped out and said, "Now wait a minute, we're not going to put up with this." So another agent and I were assigned just to investigate this. And that's what started Operation Tarnished Badge with the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation.
As part of Operation Tarnished Badge, investigators at the Robeson County DA's office and the SBI quietly began interviewing other informants and any witnesses who might have information about crooked deputies in the sheriff's office.
We started learning other aspects of what they were doing at the Robeson County Sheriff's Office with vehicle stops, allegations that money was being taken, allegations that drugs were being seized and then never accounted for. And this thing just got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Just as the investigation started heating up, Hunt was beginning to develop a guilty conscience about his involvement in the scheme to steal seized cash.
At one point, I didn't sleep a wink. I was like, "Oh Lord, here I am, stole a bundle of money." In my heart, I knew I was doing something wrong. So I said, I can't do this ever again. So I never took any more money. I always let Steve do it. And that's when my nerves was shot and I couldn't handle it. I was scared that something bad was about to happen.
In 2004, the Robeson County DA's office and the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation were looking into allegations of police corruption within the Robeson County Sheriff's Office. But the corrupt cops started to catch wind of the investigation.
At that point in 2004, one of the guys told me the federal government just ran a check on us. He said they're looking at us for some reason. Steve told me, he said, we're not stealing any more money. Whatever money you got, put it away. They're coming at us. We know it now. They ran our names, and then we heard the United States Attorney's Office was coming to search the drug office. And we realized that was it. The gig was up.
In March of 2005, the SBI executed a search warrant at the Robeson County Sheriff's Office. They went in and they confiscated every drug file. Their evidence was seized. If there was a paper clip with 2 pieces of paper between it, it was taken.
And there was a lot of drugs laying around, a lot of money laying around, a lot of undocumented weapons. Stuff that should have been in an evidence room, should have been documented. It was just in drawers.
And one of the guys that was on that search warrant seen me in the hallway, and he pulled me to the side. He said, I need to see you in Fayetteville, North Carolina. You need to come see me next week. Don't tell anybody you coming to see me, but you need to call me. And at that point, I said, oh my God. And I told Steve they wanted to talk to me. Steve said, we told you you was the weak link. That's why they coming to talk to you. He said, so if you don't tell them nothing, they don't have nothing. I went up to Fayetteville and met with the State Bureau of Investigation. He said, James, I'm going to be honest with you. All I know about you is you're a good person, and I'm calling you first. He said, you know all them boys in there is corrupt. You know all them boys in there are stealing, and I need your help.
I remember the first meeting I ever went to. We brought the U.S. Attorney's Office into it, and there was a representative there from the IRS. She had done a financial workup on every one of them. And she said, I'm ready to go. She said, these people are stealing. There's no way, based on their income, that they can have all of these things. Just no way.
When you work for a sheriff's office, your salary is public record. So we know what they made. And then, okay, well, you spent like 3 times your salary this year. Some of these guys were sending their kids to private schools. Some of these guys were driving motorcycles, which cost probably 1/3 of their salary. Taking vacations that I couldn't afford. None of these guys were rich guys. None of these guys independently wealthy. So they had to explain where their money came from.
I began to lie, concoct stories about where I was getting my money. I told them I was gambling and winning money, and I kept lying and lying and lying. And it was breaking my heart because I knew they knew I was lying. So I went home. I told my wife, I said, I am tired of all the lies. I said, I'm going to be honest. She said, what if they take you away? What if you go to prison? You're going to leave me and your son. What if they trying to scare you? I said, I don't care. I cannot lie no more. I went back the next day to talk to them again. I broke down crying. I got on my knees. I asked God to forgive me. And I told him, I said, get your pens and papers out because we're about to go to work.
By 2004, the Robeson County Sheriff's Department faced a reckoning with decades of departmental corruption. But more than a year into the Tarnished Badge investigation, one lone deputy was about to bring it all crashing down.
When I decided to cooperate fully, I gave them every bit of the information I could because I felt like if I was going to do the right thing meant you had to say everything.
James Hunt was the first person to step forward to cooperate. James explained the method and the manner in which they would steal this money on the interstate. And the amazing thing about it, it was all on videotape. They had dash cams on their patrol vehicles, And so what James did was he would count. 1, 2. You never saw a handoff, but it was just that methodical. And so when they're like, well, where is it? You know, we don't see you do anything. He said, slow it down. Can you slow it down? And they start playing in slow motion. What you see is the back of an SUV with the tailgate lifted up. James is standing in the back opening of this SUV. Steve Loving is off camera to the side, and James is so big that he is taking up all but very small areas to his right and to his left of the SUV. And what wasn't being captured was the left hand was picking up a bundle of money, and he could simply toss it over the back seat. So everything that went in the bag got reported as seizure. What went into the back seat, they split. So they split $250,000 between themselves. That was that one stop. James appeared in front of the grand jury, testified. With that, the house kind of crumbled. There were approximately 24 deputies from the Robeson County Sheriff's Department who were implicated of crimes related to tarnished badge investigation.
I had been with the State Bureau for 22 years. This is the worst example of police corruption and lawlessness involving law enforcement officers that I had ever seen.
James Hunt and Steve Lovin's habit of robbing drug smugglers on I-95 was only a small piece of the larger puzzle. Investigators also learned that these crooked officers were breaking and entering into drug dealers' homes, shaking them down for money and drugs.
They had their own little operation at night, using their patrol cars, stopping dealers after they had conducted trades, seizing money from them, seizing dope from them, and putting it back out, having other people sell it for them so they get more money that way.
This was just a culture of corruption that was rotten through and through. I just felt that stuff could never happen in real life. But we always say in law enforcement, sometimes real life is crazier than what you see on TV. And this is one of those instances.
In 2006, a 10-page indictment outlined rampant corruption and criminal acts in the Robeson County Sheriff's Department from 1995 to 2004.
There were no trials. Everybody pled guilty, which is gratifying to us, and then everybody got prison time.
The judge sentenced me to 24 months, and then I would be getting a cut on my time for cooperation with the government.
Steve Loving got 12 years in federal prison, with an additional 3 years probation. In the end, the joint state and federal investigation would take down a total of 22 officers, as well as the sheriff, Glenn Maynor.
Sheriff Maynor was sentenced to 5 years on a perjury charge for lying to the grand jury. And he got 1 year for conspiracy because he actually had deputies working on his house.
To a large extent, Tarnished Badge showed how really unprepared he was to take over the role as sheriff because of the things that they were doing.
The true victims in this case are the members of the community. 28% of them live below the poverty line. They lost money that could have gone to programs to assist the community in some way, and they lost their trust and their faith in law enforcement in their area.
Yeah, the irony of all this is, while this stuff was going on, drugs were rampant because nobody was actually working their job the way they should have.
What officers are supposed to do is uphold the law. These guys had taken an oath and they just put it aside for their own enrichment, for their own selfish purposes, disregarding the community, disregarding everyone.
When all this came to an end, I was hurt and angry because I allowed myself to become a part of this. But hopefully what I've done is showed other officers it's never too late to do the right thing, regardless of the price.